Hello, my name is Julia Steyer. We are here today on Carousel of Conversations. I am being joined today by Troy Ruptash, who is the writer, director, lead actor, and producer of the new film, They Who Surround Us. Troy, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm so excited to dig into this film.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, my first question is, can you tell us a little bit about They Who Surround Us and why this story and why now?
Sure. So this is my first feature, and I've wanted to write a feature for a long time. And I became fascinated with the photograph of my great uncle, who we had always believed had died in a prison camp in Siberia. And I started researching my Ukrainian ancestors, my grandmother who fled Ukraine in the early 30s. And so I became fascinated by this photograph of my great uncle, and I started researching their history. And then I ended up hearing about the Duplass brothers have something called the Hometown Heroes Competition, which encourages filmmakers to go back to their hometowns and make films, and specifically about underrepresented communities and cultures. And I've been acting for a long time, and I've never auditioned for a Ukrainian character.
Really?
I've never seen Ukrainian narratives, really. There have been documentaries, but in terms of narrative features, I mean,
Yeah.
of course, there was Bitter Harvest a few years ago, but it just seemed to be it was lacking in terms of
Mm.
content. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity. I entered the competition and ended up becoming a finalist. And what was so brilliant about it is it put everything in place to get your movie made, whether you won the competition or not. I ended up finding all my private investors through the process of making my way through that competition.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so I got to go back to my hometown, Vegreville, Alberta, and make this movie about my ancestors. And I took some liberty with it. I did when I got to go to Ukraine and work with a genealogist
Mm.
before the war broke out. I was
Yeah.
very lucky. The timing of all this is pretty amazing, actually. I got to go to Ukraine and found out that my great uncle not only got out of Siberia, but he became a commander with the UPA, which is the Ukrainian Partisan Army, and fought for Ukraine's independence in 1943.
Oh, I just got
Uh,
chills. Oh my God.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So he became he already had this sort of heroic nature to him in his photographs. And then I learned that he had become a hero, just as my grandmother, who had to flee the country and come to Canada. And so I wanted to write something about that. And I actually worked with Kim Gillingham, who does some creative dream workshops where you work to mine the unconscious for
Ooh.
new material. Yeah. So I started taking these photographs into the workshops for about a year. And I'm also a painter, and I started painting images of my ancestors
Mm.
and would journal my dreams and all these dreams. And then I suddenly had the idea of a story that began to emerge. And I had the idea of the first thing that came up was a forest and a lullaby that was coming from the woods, some farmer that was hearing a lullaby. And so, yeah, and I guess, I knew that I wanted to deal with themes of grief and trauma, especially trauma that is passed down through the generations from people who flee war-torn countries.
Mm.
So that's sort of how it all came about, and how unfortunately it's even more timely now because the history is repeating itself, unfortunately, with everything happening in Ukraine and people having to flee. And
I would say that
so,
was one of the things that really stuck out to me. As I was watching it, those opening scenes of the mother and her two small children fleeing. If it wasn't for the very specific time period clothing, it looked a little bit
mhm,
more older. It looked a little bit more like rural village type clothing. If it wasn't for that, it could have been a scene from today. And I think that
right.
really, like, that was something that really stuck out to me was this aspect of grief that you really honed in on was kind of the cyclical nature of grief as well, not just through
Yeah.
generations, but even through your own life. And it felt like you really honed in also on the PTSD of grief. And I was curious why
Yeah.
it was that aspect of grief that you wanted to explore.
Well, I felt like first of all, grief in general, and I find in my writing, I tend to like keep returning to the theme of
Mhm.
grief. I think it's a way for me to work through my own grief. There's a way of like portraying it in a way that I feel like if I can convey it in the way that I experience it,
Mhm.
in order for an audience to experience it, I suddenly feel like I'm less alone with it and they're less alone with it. And
Yes.
it because I feel like grief is something we don't talk about a lot. It's something that we don't allow in our culture for people to really grieve properly. Some
Mhm.
cultures do. I mean, there are some, but so I really, I've always been fascinated by the process of grief and trying to convey that on film. So that, and then also, I felt like the trauma of the war. My maternal grandmother, who fled Ukraine, even though she didn't talk about it a lot because she didn't want to talk about what happened before she fled, I began, and not until I was much older, I began to see the sort of the fallout and the repercussions
Yeah,
of how that affects not only the people who have to flee, but the future generations. So it all sort of came together, and I wanted to write something that would deal with those themes, those thematic elements.
absolutely. I was like, yeah, it was so, oh, it broke my heart. Like my heart broke for him too, because I was just like, oh my God, this
Yeah,
man has been through it. And it's so interesting to
yeah,
see of the healing and how the community was a part of that and how his culture was a part of that. It wasn't,
yeah,
okay, here's this painful part of my past, let me turn from it. It was, here's this painful part of my past, and I'm still embracing it. They still have him going to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and speaking Ukrainian. and
right.
and I love that you
Yeah,
mentioned that one of the inspirations for this film was the fact that you as an actor have never gotten to play a Ukrainian role. And so there's so
yeah.
many juicy Ukrainian roles in this one, from the child to the sister. And from my untrained ear, I was like, I only ever hear Ukrainian because my roommate's Ukrainian. So I only ever hear it when
Oh,
she's
wow.
speaking it on the phone with her family. So I have a very untrained ear. But it sounded like everybody was very comfortable with the language. So I was curious if you were working with actual Ukrainian actors or Ukrainian Canadian actors, or if you had to do any sort of language training on this film to get the authenticity of it.
Yeah, we worked with Ukrainian Canadian actors, especially the roles that really required it, like Mikola, the boy who plays my son, Roman's son. He's amazing. I mean, he's
Yeah.
never acted before.
Really?
This was his first job
His
of any
debut.
sort.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, not just his film debut, but complete like beginner. And we found him. He went to a Ukrainian English Ukrainian school, like a bilingual school in Edmonton. And yeah, he was just incredible. And same thing when we did the casting call, we said there were certain roles that we need you to be able to speak Ukrainian because I wanted it to be authentic, obviously, and wanted it to be real. And we didn't have time to like
And it's
address it
not
in
an
any
easy
other way.
language. It's beautiful, but it's
Yeah,
not easy. It's not
yeah,
something that you can fake your way
yeah.
through. Yeah.
You can't wing it. You'll notice that Roman doesn't speak Ukrainian, my character.
Yeah.
There was actually a moment where I had this plan of like I was going to learn Ukrainian for the prayer at the end, and things got so busy because I was wearing so many hats that I couldn't do it. So but luckily I had other people who could speak Ukrainian because unfortunately, and my mom, we still joke about this because she gets when we found the relatives that we found in Ukraine, they're like, "How come you didn't teach your son Ukrainian?" And it was because when my grandmother came, she wanted to assimilate. She wanted to
Yes.
learn English,
Yeah.
and so we spoke English around her. And I wish I spoke Ukrainian though.
We have the same story in our family. It was my dad was
Really?
asking his grandparents, "Why don't you teach me German?" And they're like, "Because we're not going back. So you don't need
Yeah,
to know German." Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh boy. Now I'm so glad you brought up the hats because that I want to dig in there. So writer, director, lead actor,
Mhm.
producer. What was that experience like? What were the challenges? What were the great parts of it? Because I know that's a lot of artistic freedom, but that's also a lot of responsibility. And how did you sort of build your filmmaking team around that?
Yeah, I actually loved all that responsibility because it also meant it gave me creative license and freedom.
Mm,
But I did surround myself with some incredible people. Like it was, I knew, especially as a first time director and a director who was also going to be the lead actor, that most importantly, I had to have an amazing DP. And
mm-hmm.
Kamal Derkoui, who is just incredible. He was such a gift because he understood exactly what my vision was. I didn't even storyboard in a traditional fashion. I just had my production office that the walls were covered with like photographs that I had pulled, and it would say, this is Roman's nightmare, and this is like the mushroom picking scene. And I would have all these images to give a sense of the tone
Mm. Is that,
and
it sounds like that's
how
coming
I,
from your painting background, right? Really
yeah,
seeing in
exactly.
images. Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And we were able to, his office was next to mine, and we were able to like communicate so much without saying a lot, which was incredible. So yeah, I surrounded, and my, my design team, they were just incredible. I think, because it was a small film, but we were able to attract a lot of wonderful people who really believed in my mission and
Mm.
my mission to tell this story, and they connected with the story and the themes. So yeah, I love doing it. I think, I would do it again, although I did find from this process that I enjoy actually being behind the camera more. I've spent my
Really?
life being, yeah, as an actor, being in front of the camera. And I do love to act, but there was something liberating. There aren't a lot of scenes that I'm not in the movie, but when there were scenes that I wasn't in, it was kind of nice.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed that. So, but yeah, it was an amazing process, and I felt like the more hats I had to take on, the more energy it gave me. I
Mm,
think because I realized how fortunate I was. I know I have a lot of friends who have been trying to make movies like a passion project for a long time,
mm.
and my process happened really quickly, actually, from the time I decided to enter the Hometown Heroes to getting fully financed to shooting to post production. It all happened really quickly. So, I feel extremely grateful.
When you had submitted to the Duplass brothers, had you already written the script, or was it just a concept?
No, and there's actually an interesting story because I entered the competition and there were so many things you had to do to make your way through the competition. A lot of like videos about what I envisioned, and just a lot of things to really attract viewers, because
Mhm.
their idea is all about building the audience before you make the movie. So I got so busy with that. And of course, I was doing the dream work and had ideas about the story, and I was painting, but then I became a finalist, and they're like, okay, now you have to submit. It's like I forgot.
Oh
They're like, you need to
no.
submit either like a 20-page outline or the first 40 pages. I forget what it was, but
Wow.
I was like, oh my God, I forgot I don't have either of those things. And so literally, I locked myself in my house on a Friday and just wrote through the weekend and had to submit something by Monday. And I think because I had been working in such an interesting way with the dream work and the unconscious work, and I knew there was so much material there. As soon as I sat down to let it come through, it just came out, and I just started typing away and was able to get, I think I got the first 20 pages or whatever they wanted. And I was like, oh, I made it through that. And then a few days later, which was exciting news, they said the Duplass brothers would like to read the full script. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to do this again because I didn't have the full script. But I said I could get it to you in a week. And I did. And that's pretty close to the script that we shot, which is
Wow.
amazing. I mean, there were
Wow. Yeah.
changes and tweaks, but yeah, it was an incredible process.
What I love about that process is that, my personal process is I will outline things to death. I just like, I want to know
Yeah.
exactly what I'm writing when I sit down to write it. And I love that you approached it more from a feeling and an image based. And because you did it that way, when you sat down to write, was there anything that surprised you that came out?
Yes,
Yeah.
everything. Basically, yeah, no, what really surprised me was, first of all, I remember lying in bed one night and I woke up in the morning, and this is how the dream work works, which I love. I suddenly just heard "They Who Surround Us." Like
Mm.
that was in my head, and I knew like that was the title. I thought that's the title of this film that I don't know what the film is about. I knew I had a forest and a lullaby, and but these images and sort of emotional moments began to surface, like the image of the woman first coming over the hill, the very
Yes.
beginning of the movie, like, and carrying the baby. And, you know, this isn't giving anything away because it happens very early on, but putting the baby in the river and like, you know, it stuff like that, that just came out of nowhere. A lot of like fully formed moments as opposed to text or
Mhm.
dialogue, but I really would get a sense of a full scene and visual storytelling elements because I love to, you know, I love to use visual elements to tell
Yeah.
a story rather than just dialogue. And when they come together, it's magic. But I would get a lot of these visual elements that would come through that I thought, I don't know where this is coming from, but it's coming from me, or I'm at
Yeah.
least facilitating it. So that was very, so yeah, I'd say like 99% of it was surprising.
I love that. And they do. They say that, sometimes they're like, you just need to give yourself permission to sit at the computer. And once you put yourself in writing position, sometimes all
Yeah.
that prep work just snaps in and your brain and your body
Yeah.
go, okay, we're writing. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. And that's completely informed how I've gone on with all I've written since then. I've written 3 pilots and I don't outline before I write
Oh,
now, which I know a
wow.
lot of
This
people would
blows
be
my
like,
mind.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't outline. I do a lot of inner work and I feel like I understand the story. And I love research. I love doing research. I love putting like boards of like imagery together. And then I sit down and I start writing. And, you know, I will have to like, I get a sense of the story, but yeah, I don't sit down and outline.
Oh my gosh. I love that
Yeah.
idea of the DreamWorks stuff, though. I'm going to have to look into that because that sounds, I mean, what a great way to tap into your creativity and not only your creativity, but to tap into the story you subconsciously actually want to tell. Because I think that's the
That's
hardest part of
it.
writing, too, is being like, what am I really saying with this? Because as I'm sure you know as a writer,
Ah,
you get an idea, you see a scene, but when you go to find the plot, you're like, "Ugh, what's there?" So I love
yeah.
that technique.
That's such a great point because if I would have sat down and tried to figure out the story I wanted to tell
Yeah.
around my ancestors, around these themes, it would have been completely different. It would probably been a lot more derivative because I think that's the other thing about the dream work is you try to discover fresh material that's uniquely yours because
Yeah.
it's your unconscious. But it does take time. You have to sort of coax your unconscious and let it know
Mm.
that you're listening. But then,
Oh
yeah,
boy.
it's a fantastic way to work. I think for me, it works.
That's fantastic. And now people are going to get to see the fruit of all your labor. I know it's already been released
Yeah.
in Canada, but it's going to be released February 23rd in the United States, video on demand.
Yes.
What do you hope people take away from seeing this film?
I hope that people will recognize something about themselves or their story in this film. And I know when we were lucky enough to have a theatrical run in Canada, and I got to travel around and go to theaters and see it with an audience. And people would come up to me afterwards, and there was sort of a mixture of stories, either people who had already begun researching their family history
Mm.
or people who had never thought about it, but now were like, oh my God, I know nothing about where I come from.
Mm.
And I now want to begin that process. And I would encourage them wholeheartedly. I wish I would have begun the process 20 years ago because so much of the information was lost, you know, because,
Right.
you know, I had to piece stuff together, but people had died. So I love the idea that it inspires people to look at where they come from because I think it's such a powerful thing to do.
Oh, I absolutely love that. And has there been more, would you say, outreach or conversations around the film since it's unfortunately become such a timely piece?
Yeah, it's incredible to me because like I said, I was able to travel to Ukraine, and my hope, I'm the first person in my family to return to Ukraine
Oh,
since my grandmother fled. And my plan was to come back and bring my family with me. And unfortunately, now that isn't going to happen for probably quite some time.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it was a little, it was horrifying to me because I realized that this has been happening over and over and over, and it affected my grandmother, and now it's affecting people again, and it's the
yeah.
same war. It's the same fight, the same battle that Ukraine is fighting for their independence, for their sense of recognition. And so it's heartbreaking, and yet at the same time I feel the film is important because I feel it'll get a dialogue going about what needs to be put in place for people who do flee war-torn countries,
Mm, hmm.
and for their descendants, because I didn't have a lot in place for me, because luckily I did have, I've been in therapy, and I've looked at these issues, but something that's so targeted to something so specific, which is intergenerational trauma and
Yes.
epigenetic inheritance and transgenerational trauma, they're very real. And so I think it's important to have resources for people
Hmm.
who will be experiencing that. And unfortunately, there will be a lot of people experiencing that in the coming years because of what's happening again right now in Ukraine.
Yes, absolutely. And I totally agree. I think it's a wonderful conversation starter because it's also so humanizing. It's taking
Yeah.
this thing and it's putting faces on it. And
Yeah.
that always, I mean, what a topic to take on for your first feature too. I'm like, oh my
I
gosh,
know.
he's so right. And
I
it's like,
know.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It just felt so right from the beginning, though. It just felt like it was a story that had to be told. And, it became, after a certain point, I used to say it felt like, even though it's my story, I feel like I'm just facilitating a
Mm,
larger story. And I'm just the one who happens to be saying yes to it, that I will keep saying yes, and I will keep showing up, and I will keep seeing this through. And it's been a struggle. I mean, there have been a lot of wonderful things, but there have been a lot of roadblocks and a lot of times when I thought, I don't know if I can keep going, but I'm so grateful that, and so excited now of the release in the US, in the UK. I'm very thrilled that more people will be able to see this film.
absolutely. And it's amazing too. I mean, even with the widespread reach of the internet and of the video on demand, being able to share it in the UK, in the US. I mean, it's so exciting to see just the reach that these films can have
Yeah,
now. I did want
yeah,
to hop on when you said that there are times that you face roadblocks because, yes,
yeah.
making a feature, no easy walk in the park.
Oh,
And so I'm curious if
no.
you just had any advice for other filmmakers, especially ones maybe who are looking to do their first feature or who are looking to come on as a creative wearing multiple hats, as you just did.
I think what I would relay is something that I've been hearing, and I know I hear Mark Duplass say it a lot, and I've heard other people say it. This whole idea that you can't wait for someone to do this for you.
Yeah.
You can't. I spent a lot of years as an actor knowing I wanted to tell stories, my own stories, but thinking that somehow that was going to happen without me doing it.
Right,
And
right.
so I would say don't underestimate the degree to which, and the level, and the number of things you will have to do if you truly want to get it made. But if it's truly a passion project and something that you have to tell, which I feel like everyone has that one story or several stories in them that they feel they have to tell,
Mm,
I would say trust that. Trust that you want to tell this story. Trust that it's meant to be told, but trust that there will be people to help you, but you're going to have to spearhead it.
yes.
You are the one, because that's what it's been. It's been me and my husband Craig, who's been like my partner, and he's the composer. He did the score for the film. And
Yes.
so the two of us together, we've had many people around along the ways, but people tend to fall away and they get tired.
Right.
But you have to have so much endurance. So, but I would say go for it. Don't wait for it to happen. Make it happen.
Oh, I love that. I'm feeling so fired up over here.
Good.
Absolutely. So my two last questions, I just wanted to know what's next for you and what's next for the film?
Well, for me, I am excited because I've got three TV projects that I'm working on. One of them is a limited series that's based on a true crime that
Ooh.
happened in Edmonton in 1942 that I'm very excited about. And that's actually just being sent out now. I've got a procedural that I'm working on that is starting to get pitched that has like a supernatural element to it. So it's a procedural with a twist,
Oh,
which I love.
I love that.
And then I have a comedy that I'm working on. I tend to write darker material, but I'm writing a half-hour comedy that I'm very excited about as well. And for the film, the main thing is that the February 23rd release and the push we're doing up until that release, we're trying to, this film, a lot of its success has come about because of the grassroots approach and because of the Ukrainian community and their friends who have helped us spread the word. So that's what we're
Mm.
doing in the coming weeks leading up to the 23rd, because we're trying to get as many people to watch it that opening weekend so that we can get better placement, so that we can get the film seen by more people. So that's important leading up to that weekend. So that's sort of what's the big next thing for the film.
Absolutely. And then is there just anything I should have asked or anything you would like people to know?
Uh, just know that this film, like, it's sometimes words aren't able to encapsulate the full feeling.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get emotional talking about it,
Yeah.
but this film, the telling of this story really, really changed my life in terms of learning where I come from, learning the struggles that my ancestors went through, but also I learned about their strengths. I learned about the resilient people that I come from. And so, when I say that this film is like my baby, it really is my baby. And I'm so
Yeah.
excited to share it with everyone. So
Absolutely.
just want to reiterate that those words aren't, it's easy for, to just say those words, but they truly are connected to a very deep place within me.
Amazing. Well, I highly encourage everybody to check out They Who Surround Us, coming out on February 23rd in the US and the UK on Apple TV Plus and iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Troy, thank you so much for joining us today on a carousel of conversations. And I can't wait to hear what happens in your career next, what's happening with the film, and big congratulations to you and your whole filmmaking team.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure speaking with you, Julia.
Thank you.